Hey, welcome everybody to a special episode of the Police Applicant Podcast YouTube channel. This is going to be a special event because we have kind of an important topic to discuss. And so we want to welcome everybody that's here. If you are joining us and you just want to say hey in the comments, let us know you're here. You can do that. You can also ask questions and whatever you want during the live. And we have a stellar group of people that are here this evening. And before we get started, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go around the room. If you guys can just introduce yourselves, tell us what you do, what you did, your experience, and just tell you who you are. Mike Bornman, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hey, Mike Bornman. I was at the LA County Sheriff's Department for 36 years. I retired as a captain. During my time on the job, I worked custody, patrol, admin, criminal investigations, administrative investigations. I was a field training officer at a station called Firestone. I was a patrol sergeant, patrol lieutenant. I did scheduling, training, watch commander, retired as a captain. I have an AA degree in police science, a bachelor's in English, and a master's degree in organizational leadership. And look at me, I'm unemployed.
Unemployed.
Yep.
Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Nicole.
Hello, thanks for having me. So my name is Nicole Castronovo. I'm an attorney and I'm an advocate for first responders. I've been working with police for about the last 7 years, and I do both administrative work. So I defend police officers in administrative cases, represent them at IA interviews, hearings, and I also represent police officers in criminal cases. So an officer involved shooting, a use of force, or any sort of off-duty conduct. So I've represented both fire and police for the last 7 years.
Awesome. Mike Flores.
Hi, thank you for having me. Mike Flores, I retired from San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I worked there for over 20 years. I held positions of corrections, patrol, training, specialized investigations, watch commander, sergeant. I had the opportunity to be on the department's recruitment team, and that's where I kind of fell into the background world and learned a little bit about that. Did some background work with the recruitment team, and since I've been retired, I own and operate a private investigations company and law enforcement training company, and we teach the background investigations course.
All right, Adam.
I'm a medically retired police officer. I was with the city of El Cajon in Southern California for 6 years. After that, I was a law enforcement instructor for about 3.5 years in the state of Oregon until I got fired for not going along with certain mandates that they put out up here. And so I started a YouTube channel, Officer Blue Gun, and so I've got some stuff up on there. I've kind of let that fall by the wayside. Got a little frustrated with YouTube and their policies and stuff. So
there you go. I'm Ken Roybal. I was with LAPD from 1980 to 2003. Worked backgrounds for 4 years from 97 to 01. Retired for 3 years. Went back to backgrounds when personnel took it over. And then stayed with the city of Los Angeles for 35 years before I called it quits, moved up to the PMW. And much like Mike Bornman, well, not the same, but I'm a college dropout, so I'm representing everybody with a high school diploma. But what we want to do tonight is we got Mike Flores, look who's here. Donovan Heaven here.
Hey, Donovan, how are you?
And Donovan, I feel fortunate because Donovan is watching Wisconsin play or Green Bay play football, and he's also here with us. So, Donovan, good to see you here, man. What we want to do is there's a big issue going around. It's causing a lot of debate. It's DACA recipients being hired by police departments. California, Colorado, Illinois, New Jersey have all passed laws that make it passed laws that made it so that DACA recipients could also become police officers. There's some concerns about that. What I wanted to do was I'm going to play a video, kind of give an idea of how we got here. So let's watch that video.
LAPD, before they hired them, they should have known that this was going to happen.
The LAPD finds itself in a conundrum. 2 of their newest recruit officers are DACA recipients, also known as Dreamers. California passed a law allowing non-citizens to become police officers. But as retired LAPD background investigator Ken Roybal explains, there is a significant federal problem with that.
They kind of back themselves into a corner because federal law dictates that the DACA recipients, although eligible to work in the United States legally or in California, they can't take their guns home, they can't possess guns, they can't buy ammo, and so they're not police officers, technically armed police officers when they go home.
Our inside sources say the department is working to fix this problem, but they confirm the new DACA hires will only be able to have their LAPD-issued guns while at work, and they will not be able to purchase any ammunition.
If a police officer cannot take his gun home, isn't that problematic? I mean, it could be a safety issue.
It's an officer safety issue. It's a big officer safety issue because when an officer goes home, they leave a station, you drive out of the station with the identities of police officers getting out nowadays. They aren't armed and they will not be able to protect themselves even at home.
We contacted LAPD Chief Michael Moore for comment, and while he initially said he would address this issue with us, Chief Moore did not get back to us in time for the story. The LA Police Protective League chose not to comment, but LAPD Detective Jamie McBride, also an LAPPL director, issued a personal statement that says in part, "I would be very concerned with allowing non-citizens to have the ability to arrest U.S. citizens. That doesn't even sound right." And the LAPD also wants to provide firearms to these non-citizens in violation of federal law.
So how do you think this is going to be resolved?
There's absolutely no way to resolve it because they're not going to change the federal laws.
So that's how it all got started back in October. Hang on just a sec. Back in October, the story broke that there was the LAPD, I think, had 5 DACA recipients in the academy, and that's how it came about. Then the issue came up with they can't take their guns home. And then in December, LAPD came out with a policy saying technically the DACA hires will be police officers 24 hours a day, allowing them to take their guns home with them. That's how we got to today. And this is not an immigration issue. It's not what I'd like to focus on is just the DACA hires in police departments and how the law works with all that. So, Nicole, I'm going to ask you first. Can you kind of nutshell for us what exactly are DACA recipients?
So DACA recipients are people who were brought here as children through basically no fault of their own by their parents that may have had a less than legal status and that are allowed to stay in the United States and lawfully work under a permit basically program where they have to renew every 2 years. They have to provide a current address. They can't have a felony conviction, multiple misdemeanor convictions to stay in the United States. And they also have a path to naturalization as well.
So what do you guys see as the big argument? I've seen different posts on social media where they'll say this is happening, and there's the opinions are all over the place, and some of them are kind of ignorant because they just kind of shoot from the hip, and they don't really know what they're talking about. And what I think is one of the issues is that people need to separate the DACA recipient. Is that the correct term? DACA recipients?
Yes.
They need to separate the DACA recipients from everything else. And then there's the immigration issues and everything like that. And what the big focus is on this particular situation is that can police departments, first off, can states pass laws that circumvent federal law in order to hire DACA recipients? Because I think that's the big question right now. So do you guys have any opinions on that?
So the the states can't really circumvent the federal law. The states can pass laws, but the federal still controls. For like the best example to me would be marijuana in California, right? Marijuana is legal in California, but it's federally legal. The feds have chosen not to really enforce that over the last few years, but at any time, in theory, the DEA could raid a dispensary in Los Angeles and obtain the weed that's there. So I kind of would, that's the best example I have of like a state versus federal law that's current. But the states can pass laws like it's the state of California in 2022 is now allowed, if you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to be a police officer, that's not in violation of any federal law. And so far, California hasn't passed any laws saying that, you know, DACA recipients can have firearms and be police officers. So the question really comes down to the interpretation of the federal law. So 18 USC 922 dictates who can possess a firearm under the federal gun rules. And it says that anyone who's unlawfully or illegally in the United States can't possess a firearm. And the real question comes down to what is legal or illegal status? If you are under DACA, are you in theory here lawfully because you're being permitted to work lawfully, you're documented in the United States? And so that's sort of the question that's up for grabs. And before we kind of got on the show, I sent Ken some current case law. There's a split in authorities in the circuit courts. So some states like Oregon say you're not here unlawfully if you're a DACA recipient, and then other states like Texas and West Virginia say that you are here unlawfully, so you couldn't possess a firearm. So that's going to have to be resolved within the federal courts, what the interpretation of the law is.
And that the whole issue of DACA recipients is still held up in federal court. I think the last ruling on it was not in favor of the DACA recipients in October 2022. A federal judge ruled that the program could only continue temporarily, if I'm not mistaken. And as of January 2023, there's been no movement on that. So the whole issue of whether DACA recipients have a path to citizenship is still up in the air.
Yes.
There was a September 2023 ruling that was out of Texas that said that DACA is unlawful.
Okay. Is that that's a federal ruling?
I believe
I think it was a federal circuit court. So it's a lower court. So it's got to go all the way up. I mean, all these cases are going to have to go up to the Supreme Court, to a court of appeal, and be decided. Because right now, if the Florida Federal Circuit Court makes a decision, that's not binding on the California circuit courts, right? We're in a different circuit. So I know that ruling that Adam's talking about, and it doesn't control in California. So it's going to have to be litigated up.
So it's kind of, oh, go ahead, Mike. No,
this is an injury that's been festering for decades. And, you know, if you want to just take a step back and figure out who the real villain here is it the DACA recipient who wants to give to the community they've known their whole life? It's a mess. I'm not sure how it's going to sort itself out, but I would point the finger at the federal government for not being able just to put an end to this once and for all. They've stalled a very long time, and there are people, I've met a few that were some of the most patriotic kids I'd ever met, but they're DACA recipients. They're flag waving, you know, except for being not legally here. They're as American as you or I. I think that law enforcement, I don't know. I think the sheriffs and LAPD jumped the gun, though. I think that this stuff should have sorted out before they went ahead and hired these people. It looks like they were caught off guard and flat-footed when it came down to to figuring out this issue with the firearm. And I would hate to see this thing go all the way down the road and then have the federal government tell them they all got to get out. You know, these, like I said, I've known some that have been here 25, 30 years that came here as infants. They don't know the country that they were born in. They might not even speak the language. You know, you're going to take somebody and boot them back across the border and tell them to come back in 2 years. It just, like I said, I just blame the feds for not being able to get a handle on this.
Yeah. And you bring up a very good point, because one of the interviews, Michael Moore was asked point blank, what happens if they lose their ability to stay in the United States? Michael Moore, the chief of police of the city of Los Angeles, he's not anything to do with the federal government, the Supreme Court, or anything. He goes, I don't think that'll happen. This is still being litigated, or it's being held up in the federal courts. If it gets to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules against the DACA recipients, there's a possibility they can be deported to where? And I agree with you, Mike. These kids, and forever I've been saying DACA kids, but they don't know anything different. They don't know any other country. They could go to the country where their parents came from, and they wouldn't know. Nobody would know them. I'm guessing. That's just a guess. But they would be considered. You're from the U.S. because that's where they were brought up, and so the DACA recipients they've been put in a really bad position. The thing is, though, is that as far as putting the cart before the horse, they went ahead and hired these guys, made them police officers. Then all of a sudden someone comes up and says, hey, they can't carry their guns home. They can't buy ammo. And then they go, oh, shoot. Like, did you not think about this? And then you go ahead and hire them, and then they're going to make a policy saying they can carry their guns when this is still all up in the air. What do you guys think about where we're at now that LAPD and LASD already hired them?
I think that if they put the cart before the horse, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think that they jumped the gun as far as these matters. You're right. They're being litigated and decided, right? We don't know if DACA recipients are going to be allowed to stay in the United States. I mean, hopefully they are. But you know, if those rulings don't go in the recipient's favor, then they're not going to be permitted to lawfully work in the United States. And they could have gone through an academy. They could have gone through all the things that people do to achieve being a police officer, and then lose that status. And obviously, you know, you have an entire podcast on going through backgrounds. What a process that is. So I think that it's unfair to the recipients or these job applicants that they're doing their hardest. They're out there. They may get the job of their dreams, and then they might have it taken away from them.
Yeah, and one of the things that I read also is if the federal courts rule against the DACA recipients, they lose their ability to be employed, and
Yes.
that means that every police officer that's been hired will be fired.
You know,
And-
I'm not so sure the government would make that call, frankly, because I think as far back as 2001. They can get employed, and who's doing that? The United States military. They're letting DACA recipients come in, and if they survive their military service and they get honorably discharged, they can actually have what they call an expedited path to citizenship, which I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe Nicole does, but it sounds like there is a path somewhere for people that go in the military. In fact, I was going to write an article on this, and I stopped because I just can't figure out how the ending on it. But I think that if I was God, I would say, you know what, the system we have, you want to be a cop, go in the military for a couple of years, get out honorably, then come be a cop, and you can have a path to citizenship. But who knows where this is going to come down?
Yeah, from what I gather, and Nicole, you can set me straight on this. The DACA recipients are not eligible to join the military, and there's a pilot program. There's like 500 and something DACA recipients that are in the military to get the path to citizenship. But like I said, it's a pilot program. But overall, DACA recipients are not allowed to join the military.
Yes, that's correct. So there's been this pilot program. I think maybe they might be up to 800, but it was only permitted under this pilot program. So the blanket rule is that DACA recipients can't join the military, and part of it is this firearms question, right? They'd have to possess a firearm, and can they possess a firearm? But I think that it is really interesting, kind of what Mike was talking about. If you're serving in the military and you're getting you're serving your country and you're getting out honorably, shouldn't we make a path for you for citizenship? And I think similarly, if people are serving as police officers, that would be a great way to, look, we're at an all-time low. You're an LAPD guy, right? We're below 9,000 cops for LAPD. If people actually have the heart and want to do this work, it would be great if there was a path for them after they completed their service.
So basically, there's a group. I saw this thread on, I think it was Instagram, where they were talking about a podcast had a video podcast. And they put the link up on it. Also, before I forget, Rocky was saying we're blurry sometimes, and it's true. My internet kind of goes wonky sometimes, Rocky. So forgive us, but hopefully you're still hearing the audio. But I was going to say that this video that I saw, where people were just dogpiling, it was a simple news video about the DACA recipients being hired for police departments, and then all the dogpiling came on, and it had to do. They were attacking the actual DACA recipients, and it had to do with the border and all this kind of stuff. When it's really a standalone issue. So as far as the conversation goes, there's a lot of people that just kind of lump everything into one big heap mess of illegal immigration. And I think that this issue, the way it's playing out, as far as I can see, and you guys can comment on this if you like, the states that are passing this, that are passing these laws saying that DACA recipients can become police officers, they're as far as I can tell, they're all blue states. And so I'm wondering if it seems like there's a political motivation to pass the laws so they can join the police department. LAPD only has maybe 30 at the most DACA recipients in the pipeline for hire, and they need probably at least 1,200 hires, which will take them over 5 years to get, close to 5 to 10 years. But what are your guys' thoughts, Adam and Mike Flores, and you guys are a little silent, but what are your thoughts? What's the major concern for people as far as the DACA officers hitting the streets?
Well, I think I could tell you, last year when we became what's called a private post presenter, meaning we teach classes that are certified by California Commission on Post. They govern the training that goes out to all law enforcement in California. They also set the requirements that they deem the minimum requirements to be a peace officer. We've been fortunate enough to teach several law enforcement agencies throughout the state. Over 25 law enforcement agencies have attended our training, and everybody has the same problem that I think Mike and Nicole were talking about. If the objective is to try to get recruitment, right? And I'll take it back to when I was dealing with recruitment maybe 10 years ago with my department. It's a lot different than it is now. Mike touched on it where if we're looking at hiring people that are qualified to do the job, and a DACA recipient meets those qualifications, and maybe we did put the cart before the horse, and I'm not going to get into the politics behind that or an immigration issue, but if they meet the minimum requirements, I think departments have probably an obligation to look to see how they could possibly go into the hiring process, maybe not putting, like you guys said, the cart before the horse, but maybe waiting for Congress to do something, or going to Congress and saying, hey, we have a hiring issue. We need police officers, and we have all these candidates that meet the requirements, but we can't hire them because of these issues. That's kind of what the buzz has been going on at the trainings that we've had. A lot of the background investigators that come to our training bring up conversation about current trends. That's a big one. But the end result is each agency is having the same problem. They don't have enough people to put out there on the streets. So,
yeah, Adam, what are you hearing out there on the interwebs?
I mean, it's really just more of my opinion, I guess. Like Mike mentioned before, this issue has been going on for almost 12 years. DACA started in 2012, and it hasn't been sorted out by the federal government. It's leaving a whole bunch of people in limbo. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to the rest of us because now we're sitting here having to guess at what policies have to be made to make certain special accommodations for people who and I agree with Mike when he says that some of the greatest, most patriotic Americans I've ever met are immigrants, are people who aren't necessarily just natural born citizens. Um, they are so thankful for what they have. They are happy to be a part of this great nation, and they understand, I think, more than a lot of natural born people, the stakes of having to live in other less fortunate situations. And so I feel for DACA recipients, but I think at the end of the day, we have to have clear cut rules and laws that we follow. That if you can't have a gun and ammunition off duty, then you cannot be a police officer. And if that's the way the current laws are, something has to be done about that before you just make some hokey pokey policy that they're on duty all day, every day. I mean, the overtime for them must be fantastic with that, though. I'm just saying, like, that's a lot of overtime to be on duty 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize. Going back, Mike Flores and I used to do backgrounds a while back, and I started doing backgrounds in 1997. So before that, this has already been in place that non-citizens, and I don't even know, maybe Nicole, you know a little bit more about this, but we would take applicants for LAPD, and they were non-citizens, but they were in process for their citizenship. And they had, I want to say it was like once they got hired, they had like 2 years to get their citizenship to remain LAPD officers. Do you know a little bit more about that?
I just know that the law has changed since 2022, so that is no longer a law anymore that you have to be a U.S. citizen to be a police officer in the state of California. You just have to be considered lawfully permitted to work. So you could be a resident, you could be on a work visa, etc. So I think that we've grown out of that with that statute, but I do know what you're talking about, that previously that was not permitted.
Yeah. And so we used to hire quote unquote non-citizens, and they were on the hook. They were already in the process. And in other words, they had to have already applied for their citizenship, meaning that they had a pathway to citizenship, and they had to just make sure within that 2 years after getting hired, they would get their citizenship. And but that's was going on for a long, long time. So it's really up to the states at this point, because I read it was yesterday, I was looking at an application, and the application clearly stated, and I want to say it was Ohio, maybe something like that, said that you had to be a U.S. citizen to be a police officer in that state. There was no, so it's up to each state to pass the laws, and there's only 4 that I know of so far. But
and I think we have to point out that this 2022 California law, it feels weird. It feels bad. It feels unconstitutional that you could have someone who's not a citizen of this country come and take your constitutional rights away from you, to take you, put you in handcuffs, put you into a cell, and take your freedom away from you. It doesn't feel like the right approach to things.
Yeah, so let's tackle that then. So the way as it stands right now, the DACA recipients, they graduate from the academy, they're on the streets, they're not citizens, they make traffic stops, they suspend Fourth Amendment rights for U.S. citizens. That seems to be one of the major comments that I see a lot. What is your opinion on this? Because some people say, hey, they're cops, just like everybody else. They have a right to enforce the laws of the state. And other people say they're not U.S. citizens, and they're telling they're depriving U.S. citizens of their civil rights. What are your guys' take on that?
My take on it is I disagree with Adam. I think that they're police officers, so they have the right to take away someone's Fourth Amendment rights if necessary. If someone needs to be arrested, they have the right to effectuate an arrest. And this is nothing new in America as far as having non-citizens enforce U.S. laws. The military for decades has been taking non-citizens into the military. And we're talking separate and apart from DACA recipients, but citizens have been taken into the military and are asked to enforce U.S. laws and to uphold the United States Constitution. And so I don't think it's any different having non-citizen police officers effectuating arrests.
It's very rare, though, for a military member to uphold any law within the borders of the United States upon other citizens. It takes special acts to actually have the National Guard, even as we learned on January 6th, to have the National Guard be deployed. There's extra steps that go into having actual active duty military come in and do anything on U.S. soil enforcement-wise.
Well, we have members of Department of Homeland Security, like the Coast Guard. They're allowed to enforce laws within the United States. They're not part of DOD, and they don't have to be citizens to join.
I think the difference, though, is that you don't have to, when was the last time you interacted with a Coast Guard member in your day-to-day business?
Probably about as often as I interact with a police officer. I'm not
because you don't get
getting pulled over.
Yeah, okay, well, but have you ever been pulled over?
Of course.
How many times was it by a member of the military?
Never.
So you've never interacted with a member of the military enforcing any sort of law in the United States?
No, that's not true. I lived on a military base with military police for years. So I did have a military enforcement on my life.
Okay, so unless you're on a military base, for the normal, average, everyday citizen in the United States, which is 99% of people outside of military bases and military, you don't have anyone in the military interact with you and enforce any kind of law or statute or constitutional issue upon you.
I mean, if we're going to go to the Fourth Amendment applies to citizens and non-citizens alike, right? The laws apply
Sure.
to everyone who's in the United States. So if we're going to have police officers who are non-citizens, which I have no issue with, then they should be allowed to effectuate the laws just like everybody else because the laws apply to them, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, my statement would be, it might not feel right for folks, and I know that there's a lot that it doesn't feel right, but is it legal? That's the bottom line. If you have someone who's a sworn peace officer and it's their right and duty to enforce the laws, a non-citizen pulling you over, what kind of violation exists? I don't think any does. That's the issue. It's just more of a gut feeling about whether or not you want a non-citizen pulling you over or not.
But I think that, just because something's legal doesn't make it right either. California tomorrow could say that felons can be police officers.
They probably already did. They probably already did.
They probably, it's probably coming down the pipe, let's be honest, in California. But just because it's legal doesn't make it right. We can still say, wait, that doesn't feel right that somebody who's committed a felony can now come and be the person who enforces that on me. And of course, the argument is going to be, well, cops have all gotten speeding tickets, and then you're going to write a speeding ticket. It's a little different, I think, when we go to a higher level crime, though.
Yeah.
Well, I'm splitting hairs here, but I don't think any DACA recipients have committed felonies.
No, and that's part of the things that are required that they're. And I'm not trying to compare felons to DACA recipients.
I hear you.
I'm just saying that just because if California made something legal, it doesn't mean that it's the right thing either. To me, and I think to a lot of people, I think it feels weird that somebody who's not a citizen of the country can suspend your Fourth Amendment rights. Just feels odd.
Yeah, and
Doesn't feel right.
I'm with Adam on that. It doesn't feel right to me, that just in the most basic level. But I think the big thing, the arguments that we hear are from state to state, and we can say that, well, it's legal, this is legal, and that's legal, or it's not legal. I think from state to state, you go all the way up to the states that say you can't even apply if you're not a U.S. citizen. You can't apply to be a police officer. That nips it in the bud all the way down the line. There's no non-U.S. citizens that are going to be police officers in that state, and then other states say you can be a police officer, like California, and then you have these rights. And so it's the big tug of war is based on where you live.
Well, it's
So I'm
based
gonna
on the
interject.
it's
I'm
based
gonna
on the
interject.
federal. Go ahead,
Mike.
Mike.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
I'll
Mike.
go after you.
Go ahead. I'll wait. Go ahead.
I'm going to interject objectively here and say, in a background investigator's role, right? If we teach this in the class, and I actually met with my instructors, my main instructors, in regard to this today, and other things that we're going to be teaching in less than 72 hours at LAPD's Personnel Division. We're going to be teaching various law enforcement agencies throughout Southern California and Northern California. Now, to answer a question, I guess, on Adam's behalf, a background investigator really isn't, if you get set forth with a background, right, you're not the one that's decided on what policies your department has decided on. You're given a background. You're in theory, that DACA recipient is eligible to apply in the state of California. We're talking about other states, but we have to hone into the state that we're in right now, which is in California. And this is going to be a very hot topic come next week because it's such a controversial issue. But as instructors, we have to make sure we hone in and direct the lesson plan and the learning activities to what the objective of what a background investigator is supposed to do. If a background investigator is supposed to do a background on a DACA recipient because they're allowed to work in the United States and they meet those requirements, in theory, they might have a better background than a person that was born in the United States that's been arrested for a misdemeanor or a felony that got reduced to a misdemeanor, but then no one's saying anything about that. So there's all these different backgrounds and people going into why DACA recipients may not be able to be a qualified candidate. We don't make the rules, we teach them. And that's what Post has made a regulation to allow DACA recipients, because they're allowed to work in the United States, to apply for that job.
And to speak to that, you know, Mike Flores and I did backgrounds for a long time. The candidates themselves aren't the problem. The whole issue is immigration versus illegal immigration. It's blue versus red. This is where the whole arguments come in. But the candidates themselves, the DACA recipients, are by and large, every time this comes up, I get tons of people in my comments saying, I know a guy that joined the military. I know a guy who was on the job. I know a guy, blah, blah, blah. They're all awesome, awesome people. The problem is the DACA recipients, their backs are up against the wall because the federal government has not addressed this and fixed the issue. And so it's stalled. And so the argument is based, they seem to be the target of all this. The DACA recipients are the target of everybody's ire. But in reality, if you separate it all, the DACA recipients versus the law versus what they should be able to do, should they be police officers or not? That's the big issue.
And Ken, I'll go to the extreme on this, and I'll ask Nicole to chime in. And I read this somewhere. I don't have it in front of me, but if you know, heavens forbid that we end up having to enact the draft, DACA recipients are very capable of being drafted into war. So that's a big jump into what I'm going to say here is we do have a problem in recruitment. Ken and I have discussed this. Every agency in the state of California and probably the United States lacks the ability to be selective how we were maybe 20 years ago. So I guess in this platform, we kind of do have to look at, if we have to change the standards, what are those standards that we are willing to change? Do we lessen them, or do we open them up to people that aren't capable because of a law that maybe is old and inact? I'm not sure. That's something that I think is what's going to be presented to these background investigator trainees at this class, because at the end of the day, the person that has the discretion on if they're going to move forward on DACA recipients, moving forward in the employment of a peace officer, is going to be the individual police department.
Right. Exactly. We got some comments in here. Comments are rolling in, and you guys can comment on these. Does LASD have like 15 to 1,700 retirements coming next year? If the only issue is citizenship for them, but they meet every other standard, who cares? Do it like the military, earn your citizenship. And here's another one here. We are okay with people earning their citizenship by defending our country in war and in our military, but not enforcing the rules of the country. How does is that the Uniform Code of Military Justice so much more different than California Penal Code? I don't know if you guys want to comment on that stuff. I've got a lot more comments here. When I was in U.S. Army basic training, there were people who weren't citizens yet and didn't even speak English. And some of the best Marines I served with were illegals and earned their citizenship. Why can't they do the same for Elliot? What do you guys think about this this whole argument? Military, they can serve their military, go overseas, die for the U.S., but they can't enforce the laws. What's your guys' take on that?
My issue is that it's just so gray still. I don't disagree about expediting citizenship for people who serve in the military and show that they love this country and want to be a part of this. Zero problem with that. But that's not the way that it's set up right now with service with the Los Angeles Police Department or LA Sheriff's Department. If they made it that way, if they said, hey, signing up for this, you become a citizen, and you get vetted, you go through a much harsher vetting process through backgrounds with the law enforcement agency than you would, I think, just becoming a citizen, because I've been through many of them. I have no problem with that. The problem is that they're still leaving it gray. Figure out how to solve the problem, give them citizenship, sort it out.
Yeah, and Mike Bornman and I were talking about this yesterday about the Mike. You were talking about the departments need to hire people. Recruitment's really in bad shape. And Mike Bornman and I were talking about Alameda. Is it Alameda County Sheriff, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
That had that?
No, Alameda PD.
Alameda PD in California had a $75,000 hiring bonus, and zero people applied. Zero people applied.
Signing bonuses are red flags for anybody who knows anything.
75,000, and then I was telling Mike that I read about that story, and they got the 75,000 for each new applicant from the salaries of the people that left. So that's pretty dire straits for police departments. But God, we've got so many comments here.
Man, it might be time to jump back in the game. Move to Alameda.
Or not.
My wife wants a new kitchen, so
I'm not sure I understand this comment exactly. Is it okay to have Antifa, BLM, or gang members as police officers? Of course not. Then why not have a Patriot DACA recipient as a police officer? They came here at no fault of themselves. Not quite sure I understand the totality of that one. Got some good conversations in here. Let me see if I can pull these so I can catch up.
Hey, so here's kind of a weird wrinkle.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? LEOSA HR 218. Police officers carrying guns in all the states,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
If a California DACA cop goes to Arizona, I guess they can't take their gun. So it's just another law that we run into that further muddies the water about how things work. I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
so
a random thought I had.
getting into this is an interesting topic with the guns, and I think everybody probably has an opinion on this. And so, and I don't know if I circumvents federal law. I don't know if that's the correct verbiage, Nicole, but the LAPD's fix for this was they made a policy, and I don't even know how exactly they did this, but it hasn't been implemented just yet. But in December, they came out and said that we now, they didn't admit that they messed up, putting the cart before the horse and hiring them without knowing they couldn't carry their guns home. So they came up with a policy that passed the police commission, and they said that now I don't even understand this policy, that because under California law, peace officers are technically peace officers 24 hours a day. You're on your way home, you take a police action, you're now on duty. So they came up with a policy saying that DACA officers for LAPD are technically on duty 24 hours a day, and now they can carry their guns home. So
I don't know how they're getting to that. So I think my opinion is pretty clear that I'm pro this, but my question is LAPD can't make up a policy that doesn't conform with federal law. They can't just say, that's fine and dandy. And we're kind of seeing this like in the classes that Mike and I teach. One controversy that comes up a lot is now this new law being passed where you can't get fired for smoking weed, right? And how does that pertain to police officers? So the question becomes is, you still have to obey all state and federal laws as a cop. Most policies say that. LAPD can't just enact a policy that violates federal laws. And I did look at one of the news stories that you shared, Ken. I think it was an NBC story that talked about the way they're basically trying to get around the law is by saying that DACA recipients can carry the gun within the course and scope of their employment.
Right.
I don't know if that comes from a memo that I haven't seen from like Department of Homeland Security, if there's been some sort of guidelines that say that, but I haven't been able to find a statute or law that says that there's a difference. One, there's no law on point that says what DACA recipients rights are as it pertains to firearms, which is why there's this split in the court cases, right? Because everyone's trying to interpret our current law. Are you here lawfully or unlawfully? If you're a DACA recipient, can you have a firearm? But I don't know how LAPD is getting around that, because there isn't a law that says, well, it's okay to have a firearm if you're not in this country lawfully, as long as it's in the course and scope of your employment. So they're jumping two steps. They're deeming that you're here lawfully, which I think there's an argument to be made that you are here lawfully if you're a DACA recipient, but that if you're not, they're jumping to you, but you can have a gun in the course and scope of your employment. And I'm not aware of any law that's on point that says that. So unless there's something I've missed here, I'm not exactly sure where they're getting it. It seems like they're kind of making it up as they go along, especially coming up with this 24-hour they're on duty for DACA recipients. Well, this lends another question for other police officers that are non-DACA recipients. Are we getting our correct standby pay, overtime, all of that? Because we should be considered on 24/7 as well. So there's a lot that's wrong with this policy, I think, as far as being maybe premature or not being in line with the current state and federal laws.
Well, the interesting thing is I talked to people in the know up in the upper echelons of LAPD, and apparently all this stuff was run through the city attorney's office before they got the green light.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see what cases they pulled from, because in my research preparing for this, I'm seeing a split in authority amongst the courts, nothing that's clear and totally on point and totally direct, right? So I would be interested to see is there a bulletin, like a lot of these DACA rules pull from bulletins from Department of Homeland Security, what the guidelines are. So I don't know if there was some sort of bulletin issued. I don't know if there's some sort of other guidelines issued that the city attorney is aware of, or if they're just sort of making this as their interpretation of the law. I don't know.
And I read the policy change that LAPD put out. They didn't cite anything. They just said magic. It is, and that's how it is.
And sometimes you just do that to see what happens. Because who's going to sue them? Who's going to have standing in this case to actually go into a court and sue them and say you're not allowed to do this? The federal government's not going to do it. The state government's not going to do it.
There could be a challenge to it on its face to see if it's constitutional or not. Some concerned citizen, like you brought up, could say, well, I don't know if I want to be pulled over by someone who's not a citizen, could bring some sort of challenge to this policy or lawsuit. A lot of people could challenge this, but I think that's sort of why this is problematic. What Ken's saying is we haven't seen where this falls, as you called it, the gray atom. And so here we are. And what if there is a lawsuit about it and someone does challenge it? Now what happens?
Well, I have, this brings up another question that I have. What happens if a non-citizen officer off duty gets in a bad shooting? And then the only reason that they had the gun was because LAPD had a policy saying they could carry their guns off duty. I think that's problematic, and I'm not an attorney, but that just seems like a whole world of hurt because cops get in bad shootings. And so a DACA recipient cop shoots somebody, it's a bad shooting, and then the victim goes to court and says, hey, the only reason they had a gun was because LAPD said they could. Now, are they on the hook for it?
Yes. LAPD is on the hook for that, potentially, for a number of reasons. But one of the things is, look, no matter who you are, it's bad to get in a bad off-duty shooting, right? Whether you're a DACA recipient or not, you don't want to get in a bad, first of all, you don't want to get in a bad shooting period. You definitely don't want to get into a bad off-duty shooting. But I'm looking at the question here. So as far as one of the issues that's raised by an off-duty shooting, if someone is possessing the firearm, is like this, I keep going back to it, but whether it's lawful for the person to be possessing a firearm at all. And we have a split in the courts if they're to be lawfully possessing the firearm. So that raises criminal exposure for the person too, right? Were you unlawfully in possession of a firearm when you fired it? Now you have a different potential crime that's going on, right? In addition to just being in a bad shooting, you have some other issues there as well. But I think there's exposure for LAPD because LAPD is issuing the gun. They're saying that the person is to have the gun at all times, that they're to be on duty 24 hours a day. And so I think there's an argument to be made that they could be tagged for it. The other argument would be, well, they're off duty, they're outside the course and scope of their employment. We're not covering them. But I think that if they're issuing the firearm and they're turning a blind eye to potentially unlawfully issuing a firearm, I think that is problematic. I think there's an argument to be made that they could be tagged for that.
Well, it'd be hard to say that they're off duty when their policy says that they're
on duty. That's true too. That's a very good point, which is when you're saying you're on duty 24 hours a day, then what's an off-duty shooting? You don't have one.
And then are they required to have a firearm with them 24 hours a day?
If you're an off-duty law enforcement officer and you get into a shooting, you're technically putting yourself on duty.
Right. But so here, kind of piggybacking on this, kind of taking it to another idea of how this policy comes into effect of saying that they're on duty all day is you're not allowed to drink alcohol on duty. Now, a regular police officer gets off work, goes home, has a couple beers, meets his buddy at the bar or whatever, has a couple beers, and then walks out to his car. A mugger tries to mug him. He pulls his gun out and shoots him, puts himself on duty. He's got a couple beers in him, but he put himself on duty at that moment because he needed to. But if you're on duty 24 hours a day, are they then not allowed to have any alcohol? Are they then not allowed to engage in certain things and be certain places? And it brings into a lot of question things that police officers who are on duty are allowed to do or not do.
There's a lot of labor questions there, I think.
Yeah.
And what you're bringing up.
I think it's just a brute force kind of policy. They're just trying to just take it and just ram it through and just say, hey, you know what? Yeah. This is how we're just gonna do it and then see what happens.
Yeah. I just think LAPD's like hanging themselves out there. And Mike Bornman, is there anything, have you heard anything from LASD?
Not a peep. No, I'm assuming they're probably going to just follow the LAPD thing, because how else are they going to get their people to carry handguns without some crazy policy they pop up?
Yeah. The interesting thing is that LASD has said nothing. They've been completely silent on this, and you're right, Adam, in that LAPDs, they're just like, they're throwing stuff against the wall, see what sticks. And for them not, and I can tell right now that when Gina Silva did that story for Fox LA, and they said, "Hey, so what's up?" and they go, "Oh, shoo, yeah,
Whoops.
let's see if we can come up with something about that. We're going to work on that." And then they come up with this policy they can carry their guns off duty. So I don't know, you guys. I don't know. I don't think there's an answer right now. I think that there's a lot of things that are in play, but I do believe that what I'm getting from everybody that we're talking to tonight is that I think that some of these departments jumped the gun
Ha.
on this. So, and it's not like we say, we don't have anything against the DACA recipients. Nothing against the DACA recipients. I think that
100%.
What do you guys think about, now that I'm thinking about it? Does it sound like the government is, they're like, the DACA recipients are like pawns for the government to, we're gonna use this to get a point across or whatever? I mean, how do the DACA recipients feel about all this?
I'm sure they want resolution. I wouldn't want to live in that limbo that they have to live in. It's terrible.
I can tell you from my experience as going through my former department, and being an explorer and a former explorer way back in the day, and a explorer advisor, and then having young men and women that were looking to join this profession and had to go through the steps, and maybe they weren't DACA kids, maybe they were residents and or applying for their citizenship. They're no different than anybody else applying. If they truly are trying to be a police officer or join the member of a law enforcement agency, they're trying to wear the same uniform that all of us here have either worn or still wear, or represent law enforcement in cases. So you're right, Adam. I think they do want resolution, but I think they're still staying in the fight, so to speak, trying to make sure that, hey, if their goal is to try to be a peace officer, they're keeping up with all their due diligence of staying out of trouble and making sure that they're keeping up their DACA rights. And hopefully there is some sort of resolution, not only for themselves, but as everybody's been pointing out and talking to all these law enforcement professionals from various agencies, it has to be something that gets resolved at some point. I would hope that the 10th time we teach this year, this is going to be next week when we teach, it'll be the first time for this year. So it'll be an interesting topic conversation, but we'll see how this, toward that latter part of the year, if there's any change, if any.
And Mike, how is Post responding to questions about all this? Are they involved in this at all?
The direction that Post has given to all law enforcement agencies, it just stays where the requirements are. If a individual has the right to work in the United States, then they have the right to apply to be a peace officer. Okay. And just like every other policy that departments have, and I'll just make it a very quick example, is Post doesn't require at this moment in time for a candidate to have any more than a high school diploma or a GED. That may change in the future, but that's not the topic of conversation. Right now, that's all that's required. There are agencies out there that will not accept any applicants that don't have an AA or a bachelor's degree. So that's incumbent on the agency that's trying to employ these applicants, and they have the right to put their own set of parameters that they want for their applicants. So if they want to have certain additional requirements, They have every right to do so. Post only gives you the bare minimum requirements that they require for applicants to apply.
Well, this has been a really good conversation, and I think it's unfortunate that the conversation has to be had. But the bottom line is this is all still in limbo on the federal level, and there aren't any answers right now. States are trying to implement their own laws to make things happen, but we won't know until we know. And so, any last comments from everybody here in the group? I appreciate you guys have been great this evening, but any other comments before we close out? So quiet.
I just wanted to point out too.
I'll say this. Go ahead, Adam.
I just wanted to point out to you real quick. The number of total DACA recipients, I just looked it up, is 578,000 people. That's not even that many people, honestly. At the end of the day, when we look at it, especially when we look at it compared to the current immigration crisis, or it's a drop in the bucket. And these people are so well vetted, and especially the people that are applying to be police officers are even more well vetted. I think it's time that our elected officials do something about this population and do the right thing to, make patriotic Americans actually American.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'll end on my note again, because I know people at our training they're going to ask this, and I'll leave whoever is watching this. We don't have an answer for you. I think people probably were looking to see if we had an answer, but we don't. The best answer I can give, that we give all the background investigator attendees that come to our training, Nicole Castronovo is the legal expert that teaches at these trainings. So we recommend that, hey, educate yourself on the law, know what those parameters are, educate yourself on the post regulations and what their parameters and their requirements are. And at the very end, check with your local city attorney or your county council to make whatever determination on how your department's going to move forward on this topic.
And does anybody have any insight into this? I was curious about qualified immunity. Does qualified immunity even come into play with DACA recipients?
Not really. I think the threshold issue is really the firearm, which is can you be there in the first place? But I think that if you are considered a police officer, that you'd still have qualified immunity. It wouldn't be different based on your citizenship status.
Okay. Very cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. Everybody in the comments, thank you so much. That's going to do it for us. And so I want to thank our roundtable here for being here. I think this is a really good, eye-opening conversation that we had, and I hopefully we answered questions for people that came in to watch us, to see that there's different opinions. We don't. So thank you guys so much. Everybody in the room here, please hang out once we sign off. I want to ask how you guys liked this evening. Thank you, everybody, for being here.